The dust of the high mountain pass was a fine, abrasive powder that coated everything in a film of pale grit. It worked its way into the action of rifles, the gears of vehicles, and the lungs of soldiers. Here at Forward Operating Base Kestrel, the wind was a constant, keening presence, a physical force that scoured the landscape and the morale of the men and women stationed within its Hesco bastion walls. Into this environment of rock and wind walked Sergeant Major Anya Petrova. She was a woman carved from the same unforgiving material as the mountains themselves. Her face was a map of faint lines etched by sun and concentration, her eyes the color of a winter sky, holding a stillness that seemed to absorb the chaos around her without reflecting it. She carried no state-of-the-art pelican case. Instead, a long rectangular bundle wrapped in faded olive-drab canvas was slung over her shoulder. It was lumpy and indistinct, secured with worn leather straps. As she made her way to the briefing tent, a pair of younger soldiers, the base's resident sniper team, watched her pass. Sergeant Davies, a man whose confidence was as polished as the carbon fiber stock of his Barrett MRAD, nudged his spotter, Corporal Chun. "Get a load of that," Davies murmured, his voice a low sneer. "Did command requisition a museum piece?" Chen, younger and more inclined to follow than lead, offered a weak chuckle. "Maybe it's a tent pole, or a really big samovar." Anya heard them. She always heard everything. The whispers were just another layer of sound in a world full of them. The distant whine of a generator, the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel, the whisper of the wind itself. She registered the dismissal, filed it away, and kept walking. It was data, nothing more. Emotion was a luxury, an inefficiency she had discarded decades ago. Inside the tent, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and nervous energy. General Marcus Thorne stood before a holographic map of the surrounding peaks and valleys, his posture ramrod straight, his uniform a testament to starch and rigid self-regard. He was a man who believed in technology, in overwhelming force, and in the clean, predictable lines of modern military doctrine. He spoke of risk percentages and asset allocation, his words precise and sterile. His gaze swept over the assembled specialists, lingering on the sleek, formidable rifle resting on a bipod beside Sergeant Davies. He nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Davies, your team is primary overwatch. The target, an arms dealer known as the Broker, is meeting his buyers in the Torgar Valley. Intel says light security. A simple snatch and grab. You are our insurance policy. Ensure nothing complicates the extraction." "Sir," Davies said, his voice ringing with the unshakable certainty of youth and superior firepower. "Anything within 3,000 yards is a dead man walking." Thorne's eyes then fell upon Anya, standing quietly in the back. He noted her rank, the sergeant major stripes a stark contrast to her unassuming presence. He gestured dismissively toward the canvas bundle at her feet. "And you are?" "Sergeant Major Petrova, sir." Attached for supplemental overwatch, her voice was low and even, devoid of inflection. A flicker of annoyance crossed Thorne's face. He hadn't requested her. She was a loose thread, an anomaly in his perfectly planned operation. "Supplemental. I see. And what are you supplementing with, Sergeant Major?" "Let's see your equipment." The command was a challenge, sharp and public. Davies and Chun exchanged a smirk. This was the moment of humiliation they had been waiting for. Slowly, deliberately, Anya knelt. Her movements were fluid, economical. She unbuckled the leather straps and unrolled the canvas. Lying on the dusty fabric was not a weapon so much as a collage of one. It was a Dragunov SVD, but a bastardized version that looked like it had been assembled from the scrap heap of a forgotten war. The wooden stock was dark and scarred, a web of scratches and dents telling a story of hard use. The pistol grip was wrapped in what looked like common electrical tape, worn smooth in the shape of a hand. The scope was a strange, hybrid affair, an older PSO-1 body retrofitted with custom-machined rings holding a modern lens, the whole assembly mounted on a rail that was clearly not factory standard. The barrel was long and blued, but the finish was worn to a dull gray near the muzzle. To a man like Thorne, who saw beauty in polymer and precision milling, it was an abomination. A low chuckle escaped the general's lips. It was not a sound of humor, but of pure, unadulterated condescension. "Sergeant Major," he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I was not aware we were issuing relics from the Cold War. Did you pull that from a captured weapons cache?" Davies snickered openly now. "Sir, I think my grandfather had one of those hanging over his fireplace." Anya didn't react. Her hand rested on the stock of the rifle, a gesture of familiarity, of ownership. Her gaze was fixed on Thorne, her expression unreadable. "With all due respect, General," she said, her tone unchanged, "my equipment is fully functional." Functional. Thorne stepped closer, peering down at the rifle as if it were a piece of filth. "That thing looks like it's held together with hope and baling wire. The barrel is probably shot out. The optics are a joke. You couldn't hit the broadside of a mountain with that thing." He straightened up, his dismissal absolute. "I'll be frank, Petrova. Your file is a ghost. A series of redacted mission logs and a single commendation for sustained field service. I suspect you're a legacy placement, someone the bureaucracy didn't know what to do with. So here's your assignment. You will take a secondary position on the Eastern Ridge. It's a dead zone, useless for the primary objective, but it will keep you and your museum piece out of the way of the professionals. Do not clog the comms. Do not engage unless you are directly fired upon. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Anya replied. The words were simple, factual. She offered no defense, no argument. She accepted the order as she accepted the wind and the dust. Thorne turned his back on her, his attention returning to the gleaming MRAD and the confident young men who operated it. "Davies, Chin, get to your perch. I want eyes on that valley by 0400-inch. As the briefing broke, Anya began to rewrap her rifle. The canvas folded over the worn wood and mismatched metal, concealing it from view. She worked with a quiet, practiced efficiency that went unnoticed by everyone except Corporal Chun. For a fleeting moment, as he watched her hands move with such certainty, a sliver of doubt pierced his youthful arrogance. Her fingers knew every contour of the weapon, every strap and buckle of its covering. It wasn't the way someone handled a tool. It was the way someone handled a part of themselves. He quickly pushed the thought away, turning to follow the confident stride of his partner, Sergeant Davies, toward the promise of glory. Anya, alone in the now empty tent, shouldered her strange burden and walked out into the cold, indifferent night. The professionals had their work to do, and she had hers. The Eastern Ridge was a knife edge of shattered shale and stubborn, wind-stunted juniper. It was, as General Thorne had predicted, a terrible position. The angle into the Torgar Valley was oblique, offering a poor line of sight to the designated meeting point. The wind, channeled by the surrounding peaks, was a malevolent, unpredictable beast, gusting and swirling with no discernible pattern. It was a sniper's nightmare. It was exactly where Anya Petrova felt at home. She didn't build a nest like Davies and Chun would, with their camouflage netting and tactical sandbags. She found a shallow depression in the rock, a natural flaw in the ridgeline that offered concealment from above and broke the force of the wind. She lay on a simple, thin mat, the cold of the stone seeping into her bones. She didn't mind the cold. It was a known quantity, a constant she could account for. From her canvas roll, she produced not only the rifle, but a small collection of other archaic-looking tools. A worn leather-bound book filled with pages of dense, handwritten script, tables of numbers, wind charts, elevation adjustments, notes scribbled in the margins in a language Chan or Davies wouldn't recognize. This was her dope book, a lifetime of ballistic data gathered in a dozen different climates and 100 different mountain ranges. She pulled out a simple Kestrel 2500, a basic model that measured wind speed and temperature, but she used it only for a baseline. Her true instrument was her own body. She licked a finger and held it up, feeling the chill evaporate from one side. She watched the dance of dust devils in the valley below, the sway of the tough grasses on the slope opposite, the subtle drift of clouds against the jagged peaks. The wind was not a number to her. It was a language. She uncased her rifle. In the pre-dawn gloom, the SVD looked less like a weapon and more like a gnarled branch of petrified wood. She chambered a round with a smooth, quiet pull of the charging handle. The cartridge was not standard issue. It was hand-loaded, the brass polished to a soft gleam, the bullet a long, heavy 4-caliber projectile she had seated herself. Each of the 10 rounds in her magazine was a twin to the others, crafted with a watchmaker's precision. Through her strange, hybrid scope, the world came into focus. The magnification wasn't as powerful as Davy's state-of-the-art optic, but the glass was a custom-ground piece of crystal from a German lensmaker who had long since retired. It offered a clarity and light-gathering capability that was almost supernatural. She scanned the valley, her eyes tracing the contours of the land, identifying every shadow, every rock outcropping, every potential hiding place. She was not just looking for the target. She was reading the terrain's biography. Hours passed. The sun rose, painting the peaks in hues of orange, and rose before settling into the harsh, flat light of day. On the comms, she could hear the occasional burst of chatter from the primary team. Viper 1, this is Watchdog 1. We have eyes on the objective point. No activity. Wind is variable, gusting 15 from the west-northwest. Davies reported, his voice crisp and professional. Solid copy, Watchdog 1, came the reply from the TOC. Anya remained silent. Her wind reading was different. From her position, the wind in the middle of the valley was rolling, not gusting. It was flowing down the far slope and creating a vortex near the valley floor. Davies, higher up and with a more direct line of sight, was reading the upper-level currents. He was missing the complexity, the treachery of the air near the ground. She made a small notation in her dope book. Around 0900, activity began. 2 black SUVs, gleaming even under a layer of dust, rolled into the valley and stopped. Men in dark suits emerged, scanning the ridgelines with binoculars. This was the broker's security detail. They were professional, methodical. A few minutes later, a battered pickup truck rattled down a dirt track from the opposite direction. These were the buyers. Watchdog 1, we have visuals on both parties, Davies announced. Counting 8 tangos total. 4 with the primary, 4 with the buyers. Looks like standard light arms, AK variants. Copy, Watchdog. Extraction team is on standby. Await the exchange. Thorne's voice cut in, tight with anticipation. The broker himself, a portly man in an expensive-looking coat, got out of the lead SUV. The deal was about to happen. Anya's gaze, however, wasn't on the men below. It was on the opposing ridge, the one directly across the valley from Davies and Chen's position. Her scope traced a slow, deliberate path along the jagged line of rock. Intel had said light security. Intel was often wrong. Corporate greed and bureaucratic laziness made Intel a commodity, not a certainty. Experience had taught her to trust only what she could see, and what the landscape told her. And the landscape was telling her something was wrong. There was a spot, high up on the far ridge, a patch of shadow that didn't quite match the angle of the sun. It was a place of unnatural stillness. No dust danced there. No small animal scurried. It was a dead patch in a living world. She adjusted her focus, the custom-ground lens pulling the distant shadow into sharper relief. For a split second, a glint of light. Not the broad, obvious flash of binoculars, but a tiny, needle-sharp point of refracted light, instantly gone. The telltale signature of a high-quality, anti-reflective coated optic. She kept her breathing even. Her heart rate remained a slow, steady drumbeat. She did not key the mic. Thorne had given her an order. Do not clog the comms. An unconfirmed glint was not a direct threat. It was merely another piece of data. She shifted the rifle slightly, centering the crosshairs on the dead patch of shadow. She waited. Down in the valley, the exchange was beginning. A briefcase was opened. The extraction team, hidden in an arroyo a kilometer away, began to move their vehicles into position. The trap was about to be sprung. Then the world broke. It wasn't a loud explosion. It was a sharp, terrifying crack, followed an instant later by a supersonic boom that echoed through the valley. The engine block of the lead extraction vehicle, a heavily armored Humvee, erupted in a spray of metal and steam. The round had punched through the hood and obliterated the engine as if it were made of clay. "Contact! Contact!" A voice screamed over the comms. "We're taking fire from the North Ridge. Heavy caliber." Another crack boom. The second Humvee's front tire exploded, the vehicle slewing sideways into a ditch. The extraction team was pinned, their vehicles neutralized before they had even entered the fight. Watchdog 1, identify and engage that sniper. Now! Thorne's voice was a roar of fury and disbelief. "Trying, sir." Davy's voice was strained. "I can't get a bead. The wind. The range is extreme." He's dug in deep. Anya watched through her scope. The broker and his men were already piling back into their SUVs. The deal aborted. The buyers were scattering on foot. The mission was falling apart. The enemy sniper was a professional. He had chosen his position perfectly, a fortress of rock at a range that stretched the capabilities of even the most advanced systems. He was using the wind and the terrain to his advantage, firing between gusts, his muzzle flash completely concealed by the deep shadows of his hide. The third shot. This one was different, not aimed at the vehicles, but at the ridge where Davies and Chun were located. A shower of rock chips and dust exploded a few feet from their position. It was a ranging shot, a message. "I see you. You are next." "He's got us pinned." Chen's voice was tight with panic. "We can't expose ourselves to get a shot." Thorne's plan, his clean lines and risk percentages, had evaporated into the thin mountain air. His primary assets were neutralized. His secondary assets were pinned. The HVT was escaping, and a ghost on the opposite ridge held all the cards. In the TOC, the general slammed his fist on the console. His perfect operation was a catastrophic failure. The situation in the Torgar Valley devolved into pure chaos. The enemy sniper was a phantom, methodically dismantling the operation piece by piece. His fourth shot wasn't aimed at the crippled extraction team or the pinned Overwatch of Watchdog 1. It was aimed at their communications. The bullet, a massive 416 caliber slug, impacted the portable comms relay dish set up near the extraction team's position, shattering it into 1,000 pieces of twisted metal and plastic. The primary comms channel dissolved into a hiss of static. Only the local line-of-sight network remained, connecting the teams in the valley to each other, but their link to Thorne and the FOB was severed. "TOC, do you copy?" "TOC, this is Lancer 1. How copy?" The extraction team leader's voice was frayed. Silence answered him. "He cut us off," Davies transmitted, his voice grim. "We're on our own out here." Panic was a contagion, and it was spreading fast. The broker's SUVs were speeding away down the valley road, kicking up a massive plume of dust. The buyers had vanished into the rocks. The mission was no longer about a snatch and grab, it was about survival. Through her scope, Anya remained a statue of calm. She saw it all. She saw the enemy sniper's discipline. He was not firing wildly. Each shot was deliberate, tactical, designed to cripple and isolate. He was a master of his craft. He knew the terrain, he knew the ballistics, and he was utterly patient. She watched the dust plume from the escaping SUVs and calculated their speed. She watched the pinned soldiers of the extraction team trying to find cover behind their disabled vehicles. She watched the puffs of dust kicked up by the wind around Davies and Chen's hide, noting the shift in the vortex on the valley floor. On the north ridge, the unnatural shadow remained. The sniper was invisible, but he wasn't a ghost. He was a man. He had to breathe. He had a pulse. And he had just fired 4 times. Each shot produced heat, a temporary bloom of thermal energy from the barrel. He would be using a suppressor, of course, one that also mitigated flash, but it couldn't eliminate heat entirely. Not instantly. Anya reached into her pack and retrieved another small, strange-looking device. It was an old thermal imager, a bulky, first-generation model with a grainy, low-resolution display. It was ancient by modern standards. But she had modified it, replacing the original sensor with a custom one and linking it to a tiny processor she had programmed herself. She powered it on, the monochrome screen flickering to life. She didn't mount it to her rifle. She held it to the side, using it as a spotter. She scanned the patch of shadow. For a moment, nothing. Just the cold, uniform gray of the rock. Then a flicker. A tiny, faint bloom of lighter gray, no bigger than a pixel, appeared and then began to fade. The residual heat from the enemy sniper's last shot. It was exactly where she had seen the glint of light earlier. It was his firing port. He was there. She put the thermal imager down. She now had his precise location. The next problem was physics. Using a laser rangefinder would be suicide. Its beam would be a beacon leading straight back to her. Instead, she used her scope's reticle, a modified mil-dot system of her own design. The SUVs below were a known length. The men were a known height. Using simple trigonometry and the markings in her scope, she calculated the range. She did the math 3 times in her head. Each time, the answer was the same. It was staggering. She keyed her mic for the first time since the fighting started. Her voice, calm and even, cut through the panic chatter. Watchdog 1, this is Kestrel Actual. What is your range estimate to the enemy position? There was a pause. Davies, surprised to hear her voice, responded. Range is... It's got to be over 4,000 yards. It's impossible. The bullet drop is over 1,000 inches. The wind. 4,257 yards, Anya said. The number was precise, absolute. Wind is a 10-mile-per-hour full value, dropping to a 5-mile-per-hour vortex at mid-range, then reversing to a 2-mile-per-hour tailwind near the target. Coriolis is a 38-inch left drift at that range. Spin drift adds another 29 inches right. Air density at this altitude requires a 12% reduction in elevation dope. Silence on the comms. Her string of data was so dense, so specific, it sounded like a transmission from another world. Chun, lying next to Davies, looked at his own advanced ballistic computer. It was struggling to produce a coherent firing solution, its screen flashing with error messages due to the variable wind and extreme range. That's insane, Davies finally stammered. No rifle can make that shot. Not in these conditions. Mine can, Anya stated. It was not a boast. It was a fact. She settled behind her rifle, becoming part of the rock she lay on. Her body was the platform. Her breathing slowed until it was almost imperceptible. Inhale, exhale. The space between heartbeats widened. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope. The crosshairs rested on the spot where she had seen the heat bloom. There was nothing to see there now but shadow. She was aiming at a memory. She consulted her dope book one last time, her finger tracing a line of numbers in the worn pages. She reached up to her scope turret. The clicks were loud in the silence, each one a precise, mechanical increment. She dialed in an amount of elevation that would seem absurd to any other marksman. The adjustment was massive, lifting the barrel of the rifle to what looked like a comical upward angle. She was not aiming at the target. She was aiming at a point in the sky hundreds of feet above it. Gravity would do the rest. Then the windage. This was not a matter of mechanics, but of art, of instinct. She held her breath, feeling the pressure of the air on her cheek. The vortex in the valley was the key. It would push the bullet one way, and then the upper currents would push it back. She had to fire through a moving, invisible river. She made a final, tiny adjustment to the windage knob. Her finger moved to the trigger. It was a 2-stage trigger she had filed and polished herself over years, until she knew its breaking point not by pressure, but by thought. The first stage was taken up. She was on the wall. The world was gone. There was only the rifle, the rock, the air, and a single point of shadow 4,257 yards away. She saw a flicker of movement near the extraction team. One of the soldiers was trying to crawl to a better position. The enemy sniper would see that. He would take another shot. He would have to expose the tip of his barrel for a fraction of a second. She keyed her mic one last time, her voice a low whisper. Vostok, I have a solution. In the TOC, where a backup generator had finally restored a single monitor displaying a scrambled data feed, General Thorne heard the strange call sign. Who the hell is Vostok? He snarled to a nearby analyst. Tell them to stand down. No one is to engage. But his command was for a channel that no longer reached the valley. Anya heard only the wind. She saw the tiny, almost imperceptible shift in the shadows on the north ridge as the enemy sniper prepared to fire again. Now, her fingers squeezed. The SVD bucked against her shoulder, a familiar, solid kick. The report was a sharp crack, flatter than the thunder of the Barrett, but no less final. The brass casing ejected, spinning through the air in a graceful arc, landing with a soft tink on the rock beside her. She did not move. She did not blink. She kept her eye pressed to the scope, watching, her breathing still suspended. The shot was an act of faith. She had thrown a tiny piece of metal into a chaotic world of wind and distance, trusting her calculations, her senses, and her rifle. The bullet, a custom-forged 185-grain projectile, left the barrel at 2,700 feet per second. It began to climb, fighting against gravity and air resistance. The journey took nearly 6 seconds. For the first second, it flew straight and true. Then the forces of nature began their work. It arced upwards, reaching the apex of its trajectory 1,000 yards out, hundreds of feet above the valley floor. Gravity began to pull it back down, its velocity bleeding away. The Coriolis effect, the subtle spin of the Earth itself, began to nudge it gently to the left. The wind, the violent river of air, slammed into it. It was pushed right, then dropped into the vortex and was shoved hard left, then climbed back into the upper current and was pushed right again. To anyone else, it was a bullet lost to the elements, a hopeless gamble. To Anya, it was a known path. She had accounted for every variable. She had willed it. On the north ridge, the enemy sniper was settling his own crosshairs on the exposed soldier below. His world was calm, controlled. He was the predator, untouchable in his stone fortress. He would never hear the shot that killed him. Anya saw it through her scope. A tiny puff of dust and rock exploded from the firing port she had been aiming at. Not a miss that hit the rock face, but an impact that went through the opening. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the long, heavy barrel of the enemy's anti-material rifle slowly, drunkenly, tilted upwards and slid out of the hide, tumbling end over end down the rock face before disappearing into a crevasse. Silence descended upon the Tor-Gar Valley. A profound, absolute silence, broken only by the ever-present whisper of the wind. The panicked comms chatter had ceased. The soldiers of the extraction team, frozen in their positions, slowly raised their heads. Davies and Chen, pressed against the rock on their ridge, stared across the vast expanse of air, their mouths agape. The brokers' SUVs, now a distant smudge on the horizon, continued their escape. The HVT was lost, but the immediate lethal threat was gone. The phantom of the North Ridge had been exorcised. Watchdog status? The Lancer 1 team leader finally managed to say, his voice laced with disbelief. Davies keyed his mic, his own voice unsteady. Threat is neutralized. Target is down. I repeat, the enemy sniper is down, he paused. Then added, his professional mask shattered. I don't know how. I didn't see the shot. I don't know who took it. Anya calmly worked the bolt on her rifle, ejecting the spent casing from the chamber and watching it clatter onto the rock. She didn't speak. The action was complete. The result spoke for itself. Back at FOB Kestrel, the single working monitor in the TOC flickered, the scrambled data feed finally resolving into a coherent tactical display. A red icon representing the enemy sniper had been automatically flagged as eliminated. General Thorne stared at the screen, his face a mask of confusion and fury. The mission was a failure, but the most dangerous element had been removed by an unknown variable. Who is Vostok? He demanded again, his voice low and dangerous. He turned to the young communications analyst, a corporal whose hands were flying across a keyboard. Sir, I'm trying to find it. the corporal said, his voice strained. That call sign isn't in the current operational roster. It's not registered to any unit on this base. Then look deeper, Thorne snapped. Check the archives. Cross-reference personnel attached for this op. I want a name. Now. The analyst's fingers became a blur. He bypassed the standard personnel database and delved into the deep archives, the digital resting place of classified histories and forgotten wars. He typed in the call sign, VOSTOK. The system churned for a moment. Then a single file appeared on his screen. It was heavily encrypted, flagged with warnings from 3 different intelligence agencies. With his high-level clearance, the analyst bypassed the first 2 firewalls, but the third required a direct command override from the general. Sir, it's a JSOC legacy file. Black-level clearance. I need your authorization. Thorne strode over, his eyes fixed on the screen. He placed his thumb on the biometric scanner. Access it. The file decrypted. It was sparse, most of the text replaced with solid black bars of redaction. But there was a name, a rank, and a grainy black-and-white photograph from 20 years prior. The face was younger, harder, but the eyes were the same. The color of a winter sky. Sergeant Major Anya Petrova. The analyst scrolled down, his own eyes widening. There were no mission summaries, only a series of dates, locations, and single-sentence after-action reports. Objective neutralized, threat eliminated, the locations were a litany of the world's most brutal and forgotten conflicts. Chechnya, Bosnia, the shadow wars of Central Africa, the high deserts of Afghanistan long before the official invasion. Then he found it. A single, unredacted commendation from a legendary, long-retired Special Forces colonel. The analyst read it aloud, his voice barely a whisper. Subject known as Vostok is not a sniper in the traditional sense. A traditional sniper uses mathematics to conquer distance. Vostok uses an intuitive understanding of physics that borders on the preternatural. We sent her on a mission in the Caucasus. An enemy commander was fortified in a mountain bunker, the position deemed unassailable by conventional assets. The only line of sight was from an opposing peak at a range our analysts calculated as statistically impossible. Vostok took a single, hand-loaded round from a personally modified SVD and fired it through a ventilation shaft less than 12 inches wide. She does not aim a rifle. She wills the bullet to its target. Her methods are unconventional, her equipment appears archaic, but her results are absolute. She is a living ghost, a scalpel in a world of hammers. General Thorne stood frozen, the analyst's words hanging in the silent tent. He looked from the file to the tactical map, where the 4,257-yard distance between Anya's useless position and the enemy hide was now displayed. He remembered his own words, his condescending laughter. You couldn't hit the broadside of a mountain with that thing. The broken rifle, the ghost file, the impossible shot. It all coalesced into a stunning, humbling revelation. He hadn't sent a legacy placement to the sidelines. He had sent a legend. And she had just saved his men from a disaster of his own making, using a rifle he had dismissed as a joke. A cold dread, followed by a deeper, more profound sense of awe, washed over him. He had been in the presence of greatness and had been utterly blind to it. The return to FOB Kestrel was somber. The extraction team's vehicles were towed back, scarred and crippled. The mission was a tactical failure. The broker had escaped. But it was a strategic survival. Every soldier had come back alive, a fact that weighed heavily on the command staff. The only casualty was an enemy phantom on a distant ridge, a phantom no one had been able to see, let alone target. The mood on the base had shifted. The usual boisterous energy was gone, replaced by a quiet, contemplative atmosphere. Whispers circulated, no longer of mockery, but of disbelief and wonder. The story of the shot had spread like wildfire, passed in hushed tones from the comms text to the mechanics to the infantry grunts. A shot from over 4 kilometers. A shot that defied physics. A shot from the woman with the old rifle. Anya Petrova returned as she had left, on foot, her canvas-wrapped bundle slung over her shoulder. She moved with the same unhurried pace, her face revealing nothing. The soldiers she passed averted their eyes, not in dismissal, but in a strange mixture of reverence and fear. They parted for her as if she were a visiting dignitary. She went directly to the small, makeshift armorer's bench she had claimed as her own. She unrolled the canvas, laying the SVD on the wooden surface. Sergeant Davies and Corporal Chun were there, ostensibly cleaning their own immaculate MRAD. They had been working on the same spot for over an hour, their movements slow, their attention fixed on the woman across the room. The arrogance had been sandblasted off of Davies. His face was pale, his hands, usually so steady, had a slight tremor. He watched as Anya began to break down her rifle, her movements a mesmerizing display of economy and precision. Every pin, every spring, every lever was removed with an intimacy that spoke of countless hours of practice. General Thorne entered the tent. The air grew thick with tension. He walked past Davies and Chun without a glance, his polished boots stopping beside Anya's bench. She didn't look up, her focus entirely on the bolt carrier group she was wiping down with an oil-soaked cloth. Thorne stood there for a long moment watching her work. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable for everyone but her. He was a man accustomed to command, to being the center of any room. Here he was an intruder in a private ritual. Finally he spoke. His voice was not the booming instrument of a general, but the quiet, humbled tone of a subordinate. "Sergeant Major." Anya paused her work, her hands still. She slowly raised her eyes to meet his. He didn't apologize. An apology would have been an insult, an attempt to equalize what was clearly unequal. Instead, his gaze dropped to the scarred wooden stock of the rifle lying in pieces on the bench. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his fingers gently rested on the worn wood. He could feel the faint grain, the smooth patches where her hand had rested for thousands of hours, the deep gouges that were scars of battle. He was touching a sacred object. "Your file. It calls you Vostok," he said, the call sign feeling foreign and powerful on his tongue. He looked back at her. The commendation. It was from Colonel Mathau, wasn't it? The butcher of Kandahar. Anya gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Thorne's respect deepened. Mathau was a myth, a commander from an era of warfare that was all blood and instinct. For him to commend someone in such terms, it was the highest possible praise. "He was a good commander," Anya said, her first unsolicited words. They were simple, yet they carried the weight of a shared, brutal history Thorne could only guess at. He withdrew his hand from the rifle. The mission was a failure. The target escaped. The mission was to ensure the extraction team was not compromised. Anya corrected him gently. "They are all alive. The mission was a success." Thorne stared at her, realizing the profound truth in her words. He had been focused on the objective, on the prize. She had been focused on the lives of the soldiers. He had seen a game of chess. She had seen a duty to protect. He nodded slowly. "Yes, you're right." He turned to leave but paused. He looked back at the rifle. "That shot. I've run the data. The ballistics. It shouldn't have been possible." Anya picked up the firing pin, a tiny sliver of steel, and began to clean it with a small brush. "Possibility is just a calculation based on known data," she said, her voice a soft murmur. "You must also account for the unknown." As Thorne walked away, his rigid posture slightly stooped, Sergeant Davies finally moved. He walked over to Anya's bench, his own movements stiff and awkward. He held a small, pristine cardboard box in his hands. It was his personal stash of custom-loaded, 338 Lapua Magnum match-grade ammunition. Each round was worth more than a day's pay for a corporal, and to a sniper, it was more precious than gold. He placed the box on her bench, next to the disassembled parts of her SVD. He didn't say a word. He couldn't. What could he say? "I'm sorry for mocking you? You're the best I've ever seen?" The words were inadequate, pathetic. The gesture was enough. It was the ultimate tribute from one marksman to another. It was an offering, an admission of his own inadequacy and her supreme mastery. Anya looked from the box of gleaming, perfect cartridges to Davy's face. She saw the shame, the awe, the genuine, soul-deep respect. She gave him the same single, small nod she had given the general. It was an acceptance, an absolution. Davies nodded back, his throat tight, and returned to his own bench, a changed man. Night fell hard and fast in the high mountains, the temperature plummeting with the sun. The generator hummed its monotonous tune, a bass line for the symphony of the wind whistling through guy wires and around the corners of containers. Most of the FOB was settling into a quiet routine, the adrenaline of the day's events slowly bleeding away. But in the armory tent, under the stark glare of a single bare bulb, Anya Petrova's work continued. She was not merely cleaning her rifle. She was communing with it. The process was a slow, deliberate meditation. Every piece of the SVD was laid out on a clean, oilcloth in perfect order. The gas piston, scrubbed of carbon until it shone a dull silver. The bolt carrier, its heavy mass feeling comfortable and familiar in her palm. The trigger group, a complex little machine of springs and sears she knew by touch alone. She used small, specialized tools. Dental picks to remove grit from the tiniest crevices, soft brass brushes for the bore, and silk cloths to polish the metal. The smell of gun oil, a scent of acrid purity, filled the small space around her. She worked in a pool of light, a solitary figure absorbed in a timeless ritual. This was her church. These were her sacraments. She took the scarred wooden stock and began to rub it down with a block of beeswax and a soft cloth. She worked the wax into the wood, her movements slow and circular, bringing out the dark, rich grain. She wasn't repairing the dents and scratches. She was preserving them. They were a part of the rifle's history, a part of her own. A deep gouge near the cheek rest from a piece of shrapnel in a forgotten city. A series of small nicks on the handguard from a fall down a scree slope in a nameless mountain range. Each mark was a memory, a lesson learned. General Thorne stood in the shadows just outside the tent's open flap, watching her. He had been drawn there, unable to rest. He needed to understand. Watching her now, he began to. He saw that the rifle wasn't a relic. It was a living thing, an extension of her own will, and this ritual was how she kept it alive. It wasn't about the technology. It was about the bond between the warrior and her weapon. A bond forged over decades of hardship, of shared silence and sudden violence. His own world of advanced polymers and integrated electronics seemed sterile and soulless in comparison. He saw the box of match-grade ammunition Davies had given her, sitting untouched on the bench. He understood the gesture, the offering. He also knew she would likely never use them. Her own hand-loaded rounds were not just ammunition. They were part of the same system as the rifle, tailored to its specific harmonics, its unique character. The gift was not in the utility of the rounds, but in the respect they represented. Anya finished with the stock and began the final, most crucial part of the assembly. The barrel was screwed back into the receiver, torqued to a precise setting she measured by feel. The gas system was reinstalled. The bolt carrier and bolts slid home with a smooth, satisfying schlick of perfectly mated, oil-slicked steel. The trigger group clicked into place. She attached the stock and handguard. The collection of parts was once again a whole, a single, deadly entity. She picked up the rifle. It settled into her shoulder as if it were grown there. She worked the action, the sound crisp and clean in the quiet tent. She checked the alignment of the scope, her eye squinting down the barrel at a distant light fixture, confirming that its point of aim was true. Her work was done. She did not look at the rifle with pride or satisfaction. She looked at it with a quiet sense of completeness. It was ready. She was ready. That was all that mattered. She took a simple, clean linen cloth and gently draped it over the SVD, covering it like a shroud. The lumpy, indistinct shape was back, its lethal purpose once again hidden beneath a humble exterior. Anya sat on the simple wooden stool, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap. She didn't look tired. She looked centered, at peace. Her gaze drifted past the tent flap, past the gritty confines of the FOB, and up toward the sky. The mountain air was thin and clear, and the stars were a brilliant, cold fire, scattered across the infinite blackness. They were the same stars she had watched from 100 other ridgelines, in a dozen other countries, after countless other moments of terrible, precise violence. Thorn watched her for another minute, a lone woman silhouetted against the light, looking at the silent, distant stars. He finally understood. For Anya Petrova, the shot was not the point. The respect was not the reward. The mission was not the purpose. The purpose was the duty itself, the quiet watch, the steady hand, the absolute mastery of her craft. She was a constant in a world of variables, a still point in the chaos. He turned and walked away, leaving her to her solitude. He left the legend to her vigil under the cold, silent stars, a quiet guardian watching over a world that would never truly know her name, but owed its survival to her impossible skill.